Unfortunately, with mental health, you come into a space where you stay within your patterns because you're uncomfortable. So for
Mhm.
me, I'd be smoking marijuana because I was uncomfortable with, say, my loneliness or my failure, my lack of achieving things. And you have to confront that uncomfortable feeling to heal, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, when we talk about addiction, it's a really extreme form of avoidance, right? And yeah, if you want to feel better, you have to sort of find a way to break that cycle and whatever that is. By no means am I one of these people that think, therapy is the only way to do it, right? As a therapist, yeah, I think sometimes we sort of overcorrect and we're like, everybody needs to be in therapy all the time. I think it will speed things up for a lot of people, right? I wish I did it earlier, but also you can do this stuff. We can do this stuff ourselves and try to find our own ways out and use those supports. And that's obviously valid too. But like you said, the amount of pain and how long we sort of stay in those spaces trying to avoid discomfort, it's ridiculous because it doesn't work. We're still dealing with this stuff every day. When I'm talking to people, we're talking about doing exposure work with trauma. I always tell them, like, look, you're dealing with this stuff every day anyway, right? We're just doing it in a controlled way to kind of help dissipate some of that.
Sure. I forgot what I was going to say. I'm really sorry.
No, you're fine.
uh, Screw it. We'll rewind. Before we started recording, we came to the agreement that most mental health, trauma, disorders, depression, whatever, are learned majority from your environment. I'm curious to know or try and understand where you think your struggles with OCD and cleanliness came from. Are there specific incidents that you remember from your childhood that you think have influenced you?
Yeah, it's really that's kind of the question, right? So we have this ACE score, right, which is your adverse childhood event. Easy 10 questions. I'm sure you've been familiar with it. I would score like a 1 on that, right? My trauma history is very limited, and I do think psychologically, that I had the wiring for that. And I think when I was exposed, I think when you expose a child to the concept of eternal damnation and you have that sort of anxious circuitry and you kind of latch onto that, I think that's a huge problem, right? I mean, I think that's sort of where it started in searching for relief, right? That snowball started.
So for you, it sounds like maybe it came from school and that threat of an eternal hell and the Catholic Christianity vibe. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, that was definitely the first domino that got flicked over, right? Where it was like, oh shit, that because yeah, I mean what could you? I mean, it's literally the worst thing imaginable, right? Per
Yeah.
everyone at my, everyone in charge of me at school.
Is there a specific memory that stands out for you, or from? I'm assuming we're talking school rather than
Mhm.
your home life. Is there a
Yeah,
single? Is there a specific memory that stands out, or you know, a douchebag teacher that still haunts your brain?
there is, and it's interesting because my parents weren't even particularly religious, right? They were just like, "Oh, Catholic school, smaller classroom, that'll be cool." But I remember they were breaking down an analogy, and they were like, "Every time commit a sin, you get closer to, this hand's the devil, this hand's, you or whatever." And so every time you commit a sin, you get closer and closer, and then you're like fucking high fiving the devil, I guess. And that like metaphor was very effective for a 6-year old, 7-year old, and that really stuck into my brain and sort of created a lot of anxiety early on.
I'm sorry to hear that. I had something similar. I mean, I went to a Catholic school until I was maybe 8, I guess, but I don't remember that fear of God and fear of the devil ever being pressed on me so hard. I think there's a slight cultural difference there, maybe between America and the UK. I'm guessing a little bit. I think religion. We've seen extremes of religion, or extremes of religion in America that we probably don't see as much back in the UK. I think.
That is my understanding, right? America is particularly intense about it, right? And I know that I know our rates of like atheism are a lot lower than other developed nations.
Are they? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I believe so. Don't quote me on that, but yeah, no, I know America's a particularly religious country, right? A lot of Christians, and that that's going down, but we do see a lot of like, or at least, and I think you also have to grade this on a curve because I'm growing up in Kentucky, right? It's not like if we were in California, you might have a Catholic school that's a lot more liberal and less intense intense about that. So I am biased in that regard, but they were, they were pretty intense.
Kentucky being a red state as well. Yeah, it's not New York or California or Delaware, like you said. I'm curious about your siblings, if you're happy to talk about it, because off air we were discussing, or they came up, and you said that all three of you had your own personality disorder or your struggles with a diagnosis of mental health. Do you know, or are you willing to share what their struggles are or were?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And so my brother's is also OCD, and and what was kind of unusual about that, because I had an extremely early onset, his was a lot later. Like he didn't start, having severe symptoms until like his 20s, and his, got pretty severe, pretty similar in themes, I think, as mine. But when it happened, I connected him to the same place I got treatment, and he responded slower to it. And I think he had like, I think with like the later onset, maybe it doesn't, he had a little issues with the response, but he's doing a lot better now. But he also, yeah, his was also OCD. My sister, so she was a medical social worker at a children's hospital, right? Always kind of, we were all a little bit more anxious, I think, than the average bear. But when she started, seeing, what you see as a medical social worker in a children's hospital, we talk about trauma, right? Those sort of reactions started coming up, and luckily, she was in the healthcare field. She's a therapist like I am, and got it under control. But yeah, it was a little bit different, where hers was kind of strictly trauma that she saw. Where my brother and I do think, it's a kind of more of a hereditary thing, where we just had that circuitry, and when our brain found the right thing to sort of like fuse to, it was off to the races. I do think about OCD, it sort of works along different lines as addiction, but the snowball effect is very similar. So, as you wash your hands to get a little bit of relief, if a little's good, a lot's better. So it's similar to addiction in that type of thinking, right? And how out of control it can get. And trauma sort of works that way, with avoidance, I think, right? But so we were all very anxious kids, and I think we just kind of won the lottery on that too, because we had very supportive parents, very caring parents, but our biology was shitty, and then it was activated by our environment, right? Like we were kind of talking about earlier.